When a black CEO disguised as a janitor was blocked from entering his own billion-dollar laboratory, his employees had no idea they were about to face judgment from the most advanced artificial intelligence ever created. Watch as a security guard tells the company founder he doesn't belong here, while a racist lead researcher threatens to ban him permanently from his own building. But when Dr. Marcus Thorne speaks the words CHIMERA, activate protocol revelation, every screen in the facility displays his true identity, and the AI he created begins delivering the most sophisticated corporate justice Silicon Valley has ever witnessed. You won't believe how this revolutionary technology exposes years of hidden discrimination and transforms an entire toxic workplace culture in just 72 hours. Stay until the end to see how one moment of injustice sparked a movement that changed the tech industry forever.
They had no idea that the man they were about to humiliate owned every single piece of equipment they touched, every patent they worked with, and quite literally held their careers in his hands. What happened next would expose a toxic culture so deep that it would take artificial intelligence to root it out completely. Dr. Marcus Thorne adjusted the collar of his simple contractor's jumpsuit as he approached the towering glass facade of Quantum Leap Labs, the most secretive and advanced research facility in all of Silicon Valley. To anyone watching, he looked like just another maintenance worker arriving for his shift. The security cameras couldn't capture the irony of what they were recording. This wasn't just any research facility. This was his research facility. Every innovation, every breakthrough, every billion-dollar prototype being developed inside these walls existed because of the brilliant mind hidden beneath that ordinary blue jumpsuit. Marcus had built Nexus Innovations from nothing more than a college dorm room idea 15 years ago. While other tech moguls chased fame in magazine covers, he had deliberately stayed in the shadows, letting his inventions speak louder than his name. Most people in Silicon Valley had heard of Nexus Innovations, but few could pick its founder out of a lineup. That anonymity had served him well, but today it would serve a different purpose entirely. Inside those walls, his life's work was about to change everything. CHIMERA, an ethical artificial intelligence system designed to eliminate human bias from corporate decision-making, was just hours away from its first real-world deployment. But Marcus wasn't here for a typical CEO walkthrough or a champagne celebration with the board. He was here because disturbing reports had been filtering up to him for months. Reports of a toxic culture, reports of discrimination, reports that made him question whether his own company was worthy of the revolutionary technology it was about to unleash on the world. The brilliant thing about being invisible to your own employees is that they show you exactly who they really are when they think no one important is watching. Marcus had designed today's visit as the ultimate test, not just of his facility's security systems, but of the character of the people he employed. He carried with him a universal access card that could open every door in the building, and something far more sophisticated than anyone would suspect. His employee badge wasn't just identification, it was a prototype biologger, capable of recording vocal stress patterns, monitoring environmental data, and feeding real-time behavioral analysis directly into CHIMERA's learning algorithms. Every interaction, every microaggression, every moment of bias would become data points that would help his AI understand the subtle ways discrimination operated in the real world. The people inside this building thought they were on the verge of launching groundbreaking technology. They had no idea they were about to become test subjects in an experiment that would determine not just the future of artificial intelligence, but their own professional survival. As Marcus reached for the main entrance door, he took a deep breath. What happened in the next few minutes would either validate his faith in his team or expose problems so deep that even artificial intelligence might struggle to fix them. Either way, CHIMERA was about to get the most comprehensive real-world training in human bias detection it could possibly receive. The man walking through that door owned a billion-dollar empire, but the people inside were about to treat him like he didn't belong there at all. If stories of justice and transformation inspire you as much as they inspire us, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you think about using technology to fight workplace discrimination. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're just getting started with this incredible story. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when Dr. Thorne's true identity is finally revealed.
Right at that moment, as Dr. Marcus Thorne's hand reached for the main entrance handle, the discrimination he'd only heard about in reports was about to become his lived reality. What happened next would be so blatantly prejudiced that even he, despite all his preparation, would be shocked by the audacity of his own employees. Marcus approached the sleek glass doors of Quantum Leap Labs with the confidence of a man who had walked through these same doors hundreds of times before, just never dressed like this. His universal access card, embedded with technology worth more than most people's homes, hung casually from his jumpsuit pocket. To him, this was just another day at his own company. But to the security guard stationed just inside the entrance, Marcus represented everything he'd been trained to keep out. Dave Morrison, a burly security guard in his 50s, had been working at Quantum Leap Labs for 3 years. He took pride in his job, perhaps too much pride. In his mind, he wasn't just a security guard. He was the first line of defense protecting billion-dollar secrets from industrial espionage and corporate infiltration. What he failed to understand was that his real job was to protect the company's assets, not to profile people based on their appearance. As Marcus swiped his access card at the main entrance, the sophisticated reader should have immediately recognized his executive-level clearance and opened the doors with a soft chime. Instead, something else happened. The moment Dave saw a black man in a contractor's jumpsuit approaching the main entrance, his assumptions kicked in faster than any security protocol ever could. "Whoa, hold on there, pal." Dave's voice cut through the quiet lobby like a blade. He stepped directly in front of Marcus, his hand raised in a stop gesture that was both dismissive and commanding. "This entrance is for research staff only. Janitorial and service crews use the loading bay entrance around back." The words hung in the air like poison. Dave hadn't even glanced at the access card in Marcus's hand. He hadn't asked for identification. He hadn't followed a single security protocol. He had made his decision based on nothing more than Marcus's skin color and his work clothes. It was exactly the kind of snap judgment that CHIMERA had been designed to detect and eliminate, and now Marcus was experiencing it firsthand. But here's what made this moment even more devastating. Marcus's bio-logger badge wasn't just recording Dave's words. It was analyzing his vocal stress patterns, measuring his heart rate through proximity sensors, and detecting the micro-expressions that revealed his true motivations. The data was painting a picture that was even uglier than the spoken words. Dave wasn't just following misguided protocol, he was actively enjoying the power trip of putting someone he perceived as beneath him in their place. Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger that every person of color knows. That moment when you realize you're being judged not for your actions or your character, but for the color of your skin. But this anger was mixed with something else, something colder and more calculating. This wasn't just personal discrimination anymore. This was a data point. This was evidence. This was exactly what he needed to calibrate CHIMERA's bias detection algorithms. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said, his voice steady and professional. He held up his access card, the same card that could override every security system in the building. "My access is universal. Perhaps you could scan it." Dave barely glanced at the card. In his mind, he'd already categorized Marcus as a problem to be managed, not a person to be respected. "Look, I don't know where you got that card, but it's not going to work here. This is a restricted area. The loading bay is around back, like I said." What Dave didn't realize was that his dismissive tone, his refusal to follow basic security protocols, and his assumption that a black man couldn't possibly belong in a high-tech research facility were all being recorded, analyzed, and processed by the very AI system he was unknowingly helping to train. The first strike of discrimination had been delivered, but it was far from the last.
But the discrimination was just getting started. What happened next would reveal that Dave wasn't just one bad apple, but part of a much deeper, more systemic problem that had infected the entire facility. The person who had emerged from the lab would make Dave's prejudice look like child's play. The commotion at the main entrance had drawn attention from inside the research floor. Through the reinforced glass doors, Marcus could see someone approaching with the kind of purposeful stride that screamed authority and arrogance in equal measure. This was Dr. Alistair Finch, lead researcher of Quantum Leap Labs, and the kind of man who had never been told no in his entire privileged life. Dr. Finch was everything Marcus had come to despise about Silicon Valley's elite culture: Harvard PhD, trust fund background, and the kind of casual racism that hid behind intellectual superiority and academic credentials. At 42, he had never worked anywhere that wasn't handed to him through connections, and he had never supervised anyone who didn't look exactly like him. His research was competent but uninspired, the kind of work that got published because of his name, not because of its innovation. As Finch pushed through the glass doors, his eyes immediately locked on to Marcus's jumpsuit with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something unpleasant on the bottom of his shoe. Here was a man who measured human worth by degrees and bank accounts. Looking at someone he had already decided was beneath his notice. "Dave, what exactly is going on here?" Finch's voice carried the kind of entitled irritation that comes from having your important day interrupted by what he considers to be trivial matters. He didn't even acknowledge Marcus's presence, talking about him as if he weren't standing right there. "Just handling a situation, Dr. Finch," Dave replied, puffing up with pride at being recognized by someone he considered his superior. "This maintenance worker is trying to use the main entrance. I've explained that service crews need to use the looting bay." Finch looked at Marcus for the first time, and his expression shifted from mild annoyance to active disgust. "Dave, can you please handle this more efficiently? We are dealing with billion-dollar prototypes in there. We cannot have random maintenance staff wandering into the clean zone." The way he said "random maintenance staff" made it clear that he saw Marcus as something considerably less than human. But here's where the story takes an even sinister turn. Behind Dr. Finch, a young researcher named Chloe Martinez had followed him to the entrance. Chloe was everything that Finch wasn't: brilliant, hardworking, and genuinely passionate about the ethical implications of the technology they were developing. She was also one of the few people of color on Finch's research team, which meant she had experienced firsthand the kind of subtle discrimination that was now being displayed so openly.
As she watched the scene unfold, Chloe's face showed visible discomfort. Her body language screamed that she knew this was wrong, but her position as a junior researcher in a toxic hierarchy meant that speaking up could cost her everything she had worked for. This was the insidious nature of systemic discrimination. It didn't just harm the victims, it turned potential allies into silent witnesses through fear and intimidation. Marcus's biologger was working overtime now, capturing not just the overt discrimination from Dave and Finch, but also the micro-expressions of distress from Chloe, the power dynamics at play, and the way that toxic leadership created an environment where good people stayed silent out of self-preservation. "My access card should work for any entrance," Marcus said calmly, holding up the card again. His voice remained steady, professional, and completely unintimidated by Finch's academic credentials or condescending tone. Finch barely glanced at the card before dismissing it with a wave of his hand.
That card is probably for the ground floor facilities. It won't work up here. These are restricted research areas. You need special clearance." The arrogance in his voice was breathtaking. Here was a man so convinced of his own superiority that he couldn't even conceive of the possibility that he might be wrong. What none of them realized was that Marcus's simple ID badge contained more sophisticated technology than anything they were working on upstairs. Every word, every gesture, every micro-expression was being fed directly to CHIMERA's learning algorithms, creating the most comprehensive real-world data set on workplace discrimination that had ever been assembled. The toxic elite had revealed themselves, and artificial intelligence was taking notes.
What no one expected was that their victim had been playing chess while they were playing checkers. Every word of their discrimination was being analyzed, categorized, and stored by technology so advanced that it would have blown their minds if they had bothered to look beyond the color of his skin. Marcus maintained his composure, with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you hold all the cards, even when everyone else thinks you're powerless. "My access is universal. Please scan the card," he repeated, his voice carrying just enough emphasis to make it clear this wasn't a request. It was giving them one final chance to do the right thing. But Finch's arrogance had reached levels that defied all logic and reason. He let out a condescending laugh that echoed to the lobby like the sound of his own career ending. "Universal access? Do you have any idea what kind of security clearance is required to work in this facility? That card is probably for the cafeteria or the parking garage. It won't work here." What Dr. Finch didn't understand was that while he was busy displaying his ignorance, Marcus's biologger badge was conducting the most sophisticated behavioral analysis ever performed in real time. The device wasn't just recording their words. It was measuring vocal stress patterns that revealed the difference between genuine concern and malicious prejudice. It was tracking heart rate variability through proximity sensors, analyzing microfacial expressions, and even monitoring pheromone levels that indicated aggression versus fear. Every data point was being transmitted directly to CHIMERA's central processing core, where artificial intelligence algorithms were building a comprehensive psychological profile of everyone involved. The AI was learning to recognize the subtle signs of discrimination that human resources departments often missed, the slightly longer pauses before responding to people of certain ethnicities, the changes in vocal tone, the way eyes avoided direct contact, the unconscious body language that revealed true feelings hidden beneath professional facades. But CHIMERA was also learning something else equally important. It was analyzing Chloe's distress patterns, recognizing the signs of someone who wanted to intervene but felt powerless to act. The AI was learning to identify not just perpetrators of discrimination, but also potential allies who could be empowered to create positive change. "There must be some mistake," Marcus said, maintaining his professional demeanor even as he watched two grown men dig their own professional graves with spectacular efficiency. "This card should provide access to all areas of the facility." Finch's patience, what little he had possessed to begin with, was now completely exhausted. "Look, I don't have time for this nonsense. Dave, call building security and have this person escorted out immediately. And make sure his credentials are flagged in the system so this doesn't happen again." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was Finch demanding that his own CEO be banned from his own building, while an artificial intelligence system designed to eliminate exactly this kind of bias was documenting every word for posterity. The very technology that Finch thought he was protecting from contamination was being contaminated by his own prejudice. Marcus's biologger captured something else in that moment that would prove crucial to CHIMERA's understanding of workplace discrimination. It recorded the exact moment when Finch's frustration crossed the line from professional annoyance to personal malice. The AI could literally measure the point at which unconscious bias became conscious cruelty.
"I understand your concern about security," Marcus replied, his voice still maddeningly calm. "But I believe if you actually scan this card, you'll find that your assumptions about my clearance level are incorrect." Finch threw his hands up in exasperation. "Fine! Dave, scan his little card so we can get this over with and get back to work. When it doesn't work, maybe he'll finally understand that he doesn't belong here." Those words, "he doesn't belong here," were captured with perfect digital clarity. They would soon become the centerpiece of a discrimination case study that would revolutionize how artificial intelligence detected and responded to workplace bias. But more immediately, they were about to trigger a revelation that would destroy everything Finch thought he knew about power, privilege, and his own place in the corporate hierarchy. The moment of truth was approaching, and artificial intelligence had been taking meticulous notes the entire time. If you believe that technology can be a powerful tool for justice and equality, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you think about using AI to fight workplace discrimination. Don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next will completely change how you think about corporate accountability. And trust me, you don't want to miss the moment when Dr. Thorne reveals exactly who he really is.
But just as the situation reached its most toxic peak, something unexpected happened that would prove there was still hope in this corrupted system. The voice that broke through the hatred wasn't the one anyone expected, and it would change everything about what happened next. Chloe Martinez had been standing in the background, watching this nightmare unfold with growing horror. As a Latina researcher in a field dominated by privileged white men, she had experienced her own share of discrimination, though nothing as blatantly aggressive as what she was witnessing now. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was wrong, but she also knew that speaking up against Dr. Finch could destroy her career before it even began. The internal battle raging inside Chloe was exactly the kind of complex human psychology that CHIMERA had been designed to understand. The AI was analyzing her elevated stress patterns, her micro-expressions of distress, and the way her body language revealed someone caught between moral obligation and professional survival. This was systemic discrimination at its most insidious, not just attacking direct victims, but creating a culture of fear that silenced potential allies. For 3 long years, Chloe had watched Finch dismiss ideas from colleagues of color, seen him interrupt women in meetings, and observed him take credit for work that wasn't his. She had documented incidents in her personal journal, hoping someday to find the courage to report them. But the academic world was small and vindictive, and she knew that whistleblowers rarely survived with their careers intact. Yet something about this moment was different. Perhaps it was the calm dignity with which Marcus carried himself despite the abuse. Perhaps it was the sheer audacity of Finch's behavior, so blatant that it couldn't be ignored or rationalized away. Or perhaps it was simply that 3 years of accumulated anger had finally reached a breaking point. "Dr. Finch?" Chloe's voice cut through the tension, quiet but unmistakably firm. "Perhaps we should just scan his card as per protocol." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time since this confrontation began, someone had suggested following actual company policy instead of making assumptions based on racial profiling. It was a simple, reasonable request that should have been completely uncontroversial. But in the toxic environment that Finch had created, even basic fairness felt like rebellion. Finch turned toward her with the kind of cold fury that powerful men reserve for subordinates who dare to question their authority. His face flushed red, and, for a moment, Marcus thought the man might actually explode from indignation. "Chloe, when I want your opinion on security matters, I'll ask for it. Now get back to your station and stop causing problems." The dismissal was swift, brutal, and absolutely perfect for CHIMERA's analysis. The AI immediately flagged several critical data points. Finch's heart rate had spiked when challenged by a junior colleague. His vocal stress patterns revealed genuine anger rather than professional concern. Most importantly, his response demonstrated a pattern of silencing dissent and maintaining power through intimidation. But Chloe didn't retreat.
Instead, she stood a little straighter, her scientific training overriding her fear. With respect, Dr. Finch, our security protocols are clear. All access cards should be scanned and verified through the system before any decisions are made about entry permissions. That's not my opinion. That's company policy. The courage it took for her to say those words cannot be overstated. In that moment, Chloe was risking everything she had worked for, her entire career, her financial security, and her professional reputation. She was going up against a man who had the power to destroy her with a single phone call to the right people. But she was also doing something more powerful than she realized. She was providing CHIMERA with a perfect example of how systemic change happens, not just through punishment of bad actors, but through empowerment of good people who find the courage to speak truth to power. Marcus watched this exchange with a mixture of admiration and strategic satisfaction. Chloe's intervention wasn't just morally courageous, it was also tactically brilliant. She had reframed the entire conversation from a question of whether Marcus belonged in the building to a question of whether Finch was following proper procedures. She had taken the focus off Marcus's appearance and put it squarely on institutional protocols where it belonged. Finch's response revealed everything anyone needed to know about his character and his leadership style. "Ms. Martinez, I am the lead researcher of this facility. I don't need a junior researcher lecturing me about security protocols. If you continue to interfere with my handling of this situation, there will be consequences for your employment here." The threat was clear, direct, and absolutely devastating to his own cause. CHIMERA's algorithms immediately classified this as workplace retaliation against an employee who had attempted to follow company policy. The AI was learning that discrimination wasn't just about the initial bias, but about the systems that protected and perpetuated that bias through intimidation and punishment of anyone who challenged it. Marcus felt a surge of respect for this young woman who had found the courage to stand up when it mattered most. But he also felt a cold anger toward the system that made such courage necessary in the first place. This was exactly why CHIMERA existed. This was why artificial intelligence needed to be deployed against human bias. Because left to their own devices, people like Finch would continue to create environments where good people were punished for doing the right thing. "I appreciate Ms. Martinez's attention to protocol," Marcus said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Perhaps we could simply follow the established procedures and scan the card." It was a reasonable request, backed by company policy, supported by a brave employee, and delivered with perfect professional courtesy. There was absolutely no legitimate reason to refuse it, which meant that any continued resistance would reveal itself as pure discrimination with no institutional cover whatsoever. The trap was set, the evidence was being recorded, and artificial intelligence was learning exactly how bias operated in the real world.
What happened next would shatter every assumption these people had made about power, privilege, and their own place in the corporate hierarchy. The moment that was about to unfold would be talked about in Silicon Valley boardrooms for years to come. Finch had reached his breaking point. His face was red with indignation, his hands clenched into fists, and his voice trembling with barely controlled rage. This was a man who had never been challenged by anyone he considered beneath him, and the experience was clearly more than his privileged ego could handle. "I have had enough of this ridiculous charade," he snarled, his professional mask finally slipping away to reveal the ugly prejudice underneath. "I am calling security to have you removed from this building immediately, and I'm going to make sure your credentials are permanently revoked from our system." The threat hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Dave puffed up with renewed authority, clearly relishing the opportunity to physically remove someone he had already decided didn't belong. Chloe looked on in horror, realizing that her brave stand had only made things worse for the man she had tried to help. The entire lobby felt like a powder keg about to explode. But Marcus Thorne simply looked at Dr. Finch with the kind of calm that comes from holding all the cards in a game where your opponents don't even know they're playing.
His expression didn't change. His breathing remained steady. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the quiet confidence of a man who was about to deliver the most devastating revelation of these people's professional lives. "There's no need to call security, Dr. Finch," Marcus said, his words cutting through the tension like a laser beam. "I'll activate them myself." The confusion on their faces was almost comical. Dave looked puzzled, wondering how a maintenance worker could possibly activate security. Finch appeared annoyed, thinking this was some kind of desperate bluff from someone who had finally realized he was beaten. Even Chloe seemed uncertain, though something in Marcus's tone suggested there was more to this story than anyone had realized. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, a device that looked remarkably sophisticated for someone they assumed was a janitor. But it wasn't just the phone that should have caught their attention. It was the way he held it, with the casual confidence of someone who had used technology to change the world. It was the way his fingers moved across the screen, not hunting and pecking like someone unfamiliar with advanced systems, but with the fluid precision of someone who had designed the very software he was using. "CHIMERA," Marcus said clearly, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone giving a command to a system that had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Activate protocol revelation." The words echoed through the lobby like a thunderclap. For a split second, nothing happened, and Finch actually started to smirk, thinking he was witnessing some kind of mental breakdown. But then something extraordinary occurred that would change everything these people thought they knew about their own workplace. Every screen in the multi-million-dollar research facility began to flicker simultaneously. The massive display monitors in the lobby, the security terminals at Dave's station, the tablets and workstations visible through the glass doors, even the digital directory displays, all began showing the same image with perfect synchronization.
The transformation was like watching reality itself rewrite in real time. Where corporate logos and security feeds had been moments before, now there was a single crystal-clear professional photograph, a headshot of a distinguished black man in an expensive suit, his eyes intelligent and confident, his expression conveying both authority and compassion. Below the photograph, in bold, unmistakable letters, appeared text that would destroy every assumption these people had made about the man standing before them. Dr. Marcus Thorne, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Nexus Innovations. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like the entire building had stopped breathing. Dave's mouth fell open so wide you could have driven a truck through it. His hand, which had been reaching for his radio to call for backup, froze in midair as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just any security breach he was dealing with. This was the man who owned the company, the building, and quite literally everything in it. But it was Dr. Finch's reaction that was truly spectacular to behold. The color drained from his face so quickly that for a moment Marcus worried the man might actually faint. His eyes darted frantically between the screens and Marcus, as if he couldn't quite believe that the two images were of the same person. His mouth opened and closed several times, producing no sound, like a fish gasping for air on dry land. The power shift in that moment was so profound it was almost visible. 3 minutes ago, these men had seen Marcus as beneath their notice, someone to be dismissed and discarded without a second thought. Now they were staring at the most powerful person in their professional universe, a man who could end their careers with a single phone call. Chloe's reaction was different from the others, and infinitely more complex. Her face showed shock, yes, but also a dawning understanding of what she had just witnessed. She had watched the CEO of her company be subjected to racial discrimination by his own employees. She had seen systemic bias in action at the highest levels, and she had been brave enough to speak up when it mattered most, not knowing that she was defending the most powerful ally she could possibly have. Finch finally managed to stammer, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know. I had no idea who you were."
Marcus looked at him with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "That was exactly the point, Dr. Finch. You weren't supposed to know who I was. This was an audit of your character, your professionalism, and your adherence to the values this company claims to represent. And I'm afraid you have failed that audit quite spectacularly." The screens around them continued to display his image and title, a constant reminder that everything had changed in this building, and that change was irreversible.
But the revelation was only the beginning of what would become the most sophisticated form of corporate justice ever witnessed in Silicon Valley. What Marcus had planned for these discriminatory employees would revolutionize how companies dealt with workplace bias forever. Dr. Finch stood frozen in the lobby, his face cycling through every shade of pale as the full weight of his situation crashed down upon him like a tsunami of professional consequences. His mind was racing, desperately trying to calculate if there was any way to salvage his career from the wreckage of his own prejudice. But Marcus wasn't interested in hearing excuses, apologies, or the pathetic backpedaling that usually followed these moments of exposed bias. I didn't know," Finch stammered again, his voice cracking with the kind of desperation that comes from watching your entire life's work evaporate in real time. "If I had realized who you were, I never would have—" He trailed off, seemingly realizing that finishing that sentence would only make things worse for him. Marcus's expression remained cold and calculating, the look of a man who had been gathering evidence for exactly this moment. "That's precisely the problem, Dr. Finch. Your behavior wasn't based on company policy, security protocols, or professional standards. It was based entirely on your assumptions about who deserves respect and who doesn't. You just admitted that you would have treated me differently if you had known my position, which proves that your actions were rooted in nothing but prejudice." The logic was inescapable and devastating. Finch had just confessed to discriminatory behavior while simultaneously proving that he understood the difference between right and wrong, but had chosen wrong anyway. Every word was being recorded by CHIMERA, adding to the comprehensive case file that was building against him in real time. But Marcus wasn't finished. He had spent 15 years building Nexus Innovations into a company that stood for innovation, excellence, and equality. He had poured his heart and soul into creating a workplace culture that valued merit over connections, substance over appearance, and character over privilege. Discovering that his own facility had become infected with the very biases he had worked so hard to eliminate wasn't just a professional disappointment, it was a personal betrayal. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had built an empire from nothing and wasn't about to let it be corrupted by small-minded bigots. "You're not fired, Dr. Finch. That would be too simple, too quick, and frankly too merciful for what you've done here today." The confusion on Finch's face was almost comical. Getting fired had seemed like the worst possible outcome, but Marcus's tone suggested that something far more comprehensive was coming. Dave, still standing nearby in a state of shock, began to look nervous as he realized that whatever was about to happen to Finch might also be coming for him. Marcus pulled out his phone again, and this time when he spoke to CHIMERA, his voice carried the weight of a man implementing a decision that had been years in the making. "CHIMERA, Project Revelation is now complete. Initiate full facility audit protocol. Authorization code Marcus Thorne Alpha 779. The response was immediate and terrifying in its efficiency. Every computer screen in the building began displaying a new message. Comprehensive bias audit in progress. All personnel communications, interactions, and behavioral patterns under review. Results pending.
What Marcus was unleashing wasn't just a review of today's events. It was a complete analysis of every interaction, every email, every meeting, and every decision that had taken place in this facility for the past 24 months. CHIMERA had been quietly monitoring and learning, but now it was being given permission to act on everything it had observed.
You see, Dr. Finch, for the past 2 years, every badge in this facility has been equipped with advanced monitoring technology. Every conversation has been analyzed for bias indicators. Every hiring decision, every promotion, every performance review has been scrutinized by artificial intelligence specifically designed to detect patterns of discrimination that human oversight might miss. The horror on Finch's face was growing by the second as he began to understand the scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about today's incident. This was about every microaggression, every unfair decision, every moment of bias that he thought had gone unnoticed. The AI has been learning, Marcus continued, his voice taking on an almost educational tone, as if he were explaining a fascinating scientific discovery rather than delivering professional death sentences. It has identified patterns of behavior that correlate with discriminatory outcomes. It has tracked which employees are consistently passed over for opportunities, despite superior qualifications. It has measured the difference in response times to emails based on the sender's name and perceived ethnicity. It has documented every instance where company policy was selectively enforced based on personal bias rather than professional standards. Dave's face had gone completely white as he realized that his own behavior over the past 3 years was being analyzed by an artificial intelligence system that could detect patterns he didn't even know he had. Every time he had been more suspicious of certain visitors, every time he had been more helpful to people who looked like him, every micro-decision based on unconscious bias was being cataloged and evaluated. CHIMERA will now review the comprehensive data it has collected and make determinations about employment status, compensation adjustments, and structural changes needed to ensure that this facility operates according to the values that Nexus Innovations was founded upon. The AI will be impartial, objective, and utterly without mercy for those who have corrupted this workplace with their prejudices. The screens around them were now displaying real-time analysis data. Names were appearing and disappearing. Behavioral patterns were being mapped, and a complex web of discriminatory actions was being laid bare for all to see. It was like watching justice being administered by the most sophisticated and unbiased judge in human history. This isn't about punishment, Marcus said, though his tone suggested otherwise. This is about transformation. CHIMERA will identify every person who has contributed to a toxic culture, and it will make recommendations for how to fix the problems they have created. Some people will be terminated. Others will be required to undergo extensive retraining. Still others will find their compensation adjusted to reflect the true value of their contributions, rather than the inflated worth assigned by biased supervisors. The artificial intelligence was about to deliver justice more comprehensive and precise than any human system ever could.
What happened over the next 72 hours would reshape not just Quantum Leap Labs, but set a new standard for corporate accountability that would ripple throughout Silicon Valley and beyond. The age of artificial intelligence serving justice had officially begun. The CHIMERA audit worked with surgical precision and devastating efficiency. Within hours, the AI had processed over 2 years of data, analyzing millions of interactions, communications, and behavioral patterns that would have taken a human investigative team months to review. The results were both shocking and somehow entirely predictable to anyone who understood how systemic bias operated in corporate environments. Dr. Alistair Finch was the first domino to fall, but he was far from the last. CHIMERA's analysis revealed that his discriminatory behavior wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a coordinated pattern that extended throughout the research division. The AI had identified 17 separate instances over the past 18 months where qualified candidates of color had been rejected for positions that were subsequently filled by less qualified white applicants. It had documented 43 occasions where ideas presented by women or minorities in meetings were ignored, only to be praised when later repeated by white male colleagues. Most damning of all, it had tracked compensation disparities that showed a clear pattern of financial discrimination based on race and gender. But CHIMERA didn't just identify problems, it implemented solutions with the kind of comprehensive reform that only artificial intelligence could coordinate effectively. The AI recommended immediate termination for 12 employees, including Finch and 2 other department heads who had created hostile environments for underrepresented staff. Dave, the security guard, was placed on unpaid suspension pending completion of an intensive bias awareness program, with his continued employment contingent on demonstrating measurable behavioral change. The financial corrections were equally impressive. CHIMERA calculated that discriminatory compensation practices had cost affected employees a combined total of over $2 million in lost wages and bonuses over the previous 2 years. The AI recommended immediate adjustment payments, retroactive promotions, and the establishment of a transparent salary algorithm that would prevent such disparities from occurring in the future. More importantly, CHIMERA had identified the heroes who had been fighting against the toxic culture from within. Chloe Martinez, whose courage in speaking up during the lobby confrontation had been noted and analyzed, was immediately promoted to head the newly created AI Ethics and Oversight Committee. Her salary was increased by 40%, and she was given budget authority to hire a team of researchers dedicated to ensuring that artificial intelligence development remained aligned with principles of fairness and equality. The transformation wasn't limited to personnel changes. CHIMERA recommended and began implementing structural reforms that would prevent discriminatory cultures from taking root again. All hiring decisions would now be reviewed by AI algorithms designed to detect bias in job descriptions, interview processes, and candidate evaluations. Performance reviews would be analyzed for linguistic patterns that revealed unconscious prejudice. Even meeting dynamics would be monitored, with the AI providing real-time feedback when certain voices were being marginalized or overlooked. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same lobby where he had been humiliated, but everything about the space had changed. The atmosphere was different, more welcoming and inclusive. The staff was more diverse, not because of quotas or mandates, but because CHIMERA had removed the barriers that had previously prevented qualified candidates from being fairly considered. Innovation had actually accelerated because the company was finally tapping into the full spectrum of human talent rather than limiting itself to a narrow demographic.
Chloe approached him with a tablet showing the latest metrics from the AI Ethics Committee. "The results speak for themselves," she said, her voice filled with pride and accomplishment. "Productivity is up 27%. Employee satisfaction has reached all-time highs. Patent applications from underrepresented inventors have increased by 300%. And most importantly, we haven't had a single verified incident of workplace discrimination since CHIMERA went fully operational." Marcus smiled as he reviewed the data, but his satisfaction went beyond mere numbers. He had proven that technology could be a force for justice, that artificial intelligence could serve as an impartial guardian against human prejudice. The experiment at Quantum Leap Labs had become a model that other companies throughout Silicon Valley were beginning to adopt. The story of what had happened at Nexus Innovations spread through the tech industry like wildfire. Other CEOs, initially skeptical about implementing AI-based bias detection, were forced to confront the reality that their own companies might be harboring similar toxic cultures. CHIMERA-inspired systems began appearing at major corporations throughout the valley, each one customized to detect and address the specific forms of discrimination that had taken root in different organizational structures. Dr. Finch's career had ended in professional disgrace, but even his story served a purpose. His case became a cautionary tale taught in business schools and corporate training programs, a perfect example of how unconscious bias could destroy careers and damage organizations. Some said the consequences had been too severe, but Marcus disagreed. The cost of discrimination couldn't be measured only in terms of its impact on perpetrators, but in terms of all the brilliant minds that had been discouraged,
all the innovations that had been suppressed, and all the progress that had been delayed because talent was judged by appearance rather than ability. Dave, surprisingly, had become one of the program's most compelling success stories. After completing his bias awareness training and demonstrating genuine behavioral change, he had been reinstated as a security supervisor. But now he served as a mentor for other employees struggling with unconscious prejudice, helping them understand how their assumptions could harm both individuals and the organization as a whole. His transformation proved that people could change when given the right tools and motivation. The technology industry had always prided itself on disrupting traditional systems and creating better ways of doing things, but it had taken far too long to turn that disruptive energy toward its own internal biases and discriminatory practices. CHIMERA represented the next evolution in corporate accountability, a system that could see patterns humans missed and implement solutions humans were too conflicted to enforce consistently. As Marcus prepared to leave the facility that evening, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The humiliation that he had experienced in this very lobby had been painful, but it had also been necessary. It had provided the final piece of evidence that CHIMERA needed to understand how discrimination operated in the real world. More importantly, it had given him the moral authority to implement changes that some might have seen as too radical or intrusive. The future belonged to organizations that could harness the power of artificial intelligence to eliminate human bias while amplifying human potential. The age of excuse-making, of claiming that discrimination was too subtle to detect or too complex to address, was coming to an end. Technology had finally evolved to the point where fairness could be measured, bias could be quantified, and justice could be administered with precision and consistency. Standing in that transformed lobby, Marcus knew that the work was far from finished. But for the first time in his career, he was genuinely optimistic that the next generation of workers would inherit a professional world where talent truly was the only thing that mattered, and where the color of someone's skin would never again determine whether they belonged in a billion-dollar laboratory or anywhere else.
Dr. Marcus Thorne's story teaches us something profound about the invisible barriers that still exist in our modern workplaces. As someone who built an empire from nothing, he understood that true innovation requires tapping into every brilliant mind, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. His experience shows us that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically devastating. When companies judge talent by appearance instead of ability, they don't just harm individuals, they cripple their own potential for breakthrough discoveries and revolutionary progress. The real power of this story isn't just in the dramatic reveal or the satisfying justice that followed. It's in the proof that technology, when designed with ethical principles, can be humanity's greatest ally in creating fairness where human bias has failed. CHIMERA didn't just punish the guilty, it empowered the innocent, elevated the courageous, and built systems that prevent future discrimination from taking root. But perhaps the most important lesson is this. Change happens when good people find the courage to speak up, even when it's dangerous. Chloe Martinez risked everything to follow company policy and defend what was right. Her bravery didn't just save one person from humiliation, it helped transform an entire industry. Every workplace has potential allies waiting for the right moment to stand up for justice. The question is, will you be ready when that moment comes? This isn't just a story about one CEO's clever revenge. This is a blueprint for how artificial intelligence can serve justice, how courage can overcome systemic oppression, and how a single moment of discrimination can spark a movement that changes everything.
In a world where bias still shapes too many decisions, Dr. Thorne's solution offers hope that technology and human decency can work together to build the fair society we all deserve. If stories like this inspire you to believe that justice and innovation can triumph over prejudice and ignorance, show your support by hitting that like button. Drop a comment and tell us about a time when you witnessed workplace discrimination, or share your thoughts on using AI to fight bias. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because we're bringing you more incredible stories of courage, justice, and transformation that prove the future belongs to those brave enough to stand up for what's right. The next story might just change how you see the world forever.